A 1,578-foot mega-tsunami just exploded inside an Alaskan fjord visited by thousands of tourists every year. The wave was so massive it ripped entire forests off mountain walls, nearly half a kilometer above the waterline. And the most terrifying part, there was no warning, no evacuation, no time to escape. In less than 3 seconds, millions of tons of rock collapsed into Tracy Arm Fjord at speeds approaching 200 miles per hour. The impact turned the narrow glacier valley into a giant cannon of water. Any small tour boat near the collapse zone would have been hit before passengers even understood what was happening. Scientists have warned for years that Alaska's melting glaciers were destabilizing the mountains surrounding these fjords. But despite the warnings, cruise ships still enter these waters every single day. Families still pay hundreds of dollars to travel beneath cliffs that are slowly breaking apart above them. Now researchers fear this disaster was not a one-time event. More than 40 unstable mountain slopes across Alaska are already being monitored for signs of collapse, and some are believed to be even larger than the one that triggered the 2025 Mega-Tsunami. What happened inside Tracy Arm Fjord may have been a warning of something much bigger still building beneath Alaska's melting glaciers. Subscribe now for real-time extreme weather updates, mega disaster analysis, climate events, and breaking natural catastrophe coverage worldwide. Every year, Southeast Alaska attracts millions of visitors, searching for something that feels untouched by the modern world. Tracy Arm, Endicott Arm, Glacier Bay, places surrounded by towering granite cliffs, ancient rivers of ice, and water so clear and blue it almost looks artificial. Its cruise ships move slowly through the narrow fjords while tourists stand silently on deck, staring at glaciers that have existed for thousands of years. Smaller zodiac boats drift even closer, waving between floating chunks of ice while cameras capture every second. From a distance, everything feels peaceful, frozen, timeless. But the landscape tourists see today is no longer the same landscape that existed even a few decades ago. Old photographs reveal something deeply unsettling. The massive glaciers that once filled these fjords have been pulling farther and farther back every year. Entire walls of ice that once reached toward the ocean are now gone, exposing dark, unstable mountainsides underneath. Scientists describe the retreat as catastrophic, not because of what is disappearing from the fjord, but because of what the melting ice leaves behind. For thousands of years, those glaciers acted like support structures, pressing against the mountains and holding enormous slopes in place. Now that support is vanishing, and beneath the beauty tourists travel across the world to witness, the mountains themselves are beginning to move. For decades, scientists studying Alaska's fjords have been watching the same dangerous pattern unfold. As glaciers retreat deeper into the mountains, the entire balance of the landscape begins to change. Most people look at melting ice and only see rising sea levels. But in places like Tracy Arm, the real danger is happening above the waterline. The glaciers were never just scenery, they were structural support. For thousands of years, massive walls of ice pressed against the surrounding mountains, stabilizing fractured rock and sediment that would otherwise collapse under their own weight. The pressure from the ice acted like a brace holding the fjord walls together. But once the glaciers began retreating, that pressure disappeared, slowly at first, then faster every year. The Sawyer Glacier alone has retreated more than 12 miles in less than a century. 12 miles of ice gone. And as the glacier pulled away, the mountain started responding almost immediately. Cracks widened across steep slopes. Entire sections of rock began shifting millimeter by millimeter. Water from melting ice seeped deeper into the fractures, weakening the mountain from within during freeze-thaw cycles that repeated every season. From the deck of a cruise ship, none of this movement is visible. The cliffs still appear solid and permanent. But according to researchers monitoring the fjords, some of these mountains are already showing signs of instability, and the risk of another massive collapse is continuing to grow. In the fall of 2025, the instability scientists had warned about for years finally turned into catastrophe. Somewhere along the eastern wall of Tracy Arm Fjord, a massive section of mountainside suddenly gave way. Millions of tons of rock and debris broke loose at once, accelerating down the steep slope at speeds estimated near 200 miles per hour. There was no slow buildup visible from the water below. No dramatic warning sirens echoing through the fjord. It's just an almost unimaginable amount of earth collapsing directly into the narrow channel. And then the water exploded. The impact displaced the fjord with such force that an enormous wall of water shot upward through the confined valley in seconds. The waves stripped entire forests from the mountainsides and carved fresh scars into the cliffs hundreds of meters above the shoreline. Scientists later measured evidence, showing the water had surged nearly 481 meters above normal sea level, more than 1,578 feet high. To understand how extreme that is, the Eiffel Tower stands around 330 meters tall. This wave rose far beyond that. Inside a narrow fjord, there was nowhere for the energy to escape. The water slammed into the opposite wall of the valley, then reflected back through the channel like a shock wave. Everything near the impact zone was instantly devastated. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Bare rock was exposed across entire sections of the mountain. And for anyone close to the collapse site, the danger would have arrived almost immediately, faster than most people could even process what they were seeing. What happened inside Tracy Arm was not a normal tsunami. It's most people hear the word tsunami and imagine a wave generated by a massive earthquake somewhere deep beneath the ocean. Those waves can travel across entire oceans for hours before reaching land, which at least gives warning centers time to issue alerts and evacuations. But a fjord-generated mega-tsunami is completely different. These waves are created by sudden impacts inside extremely narrow channels, usually from landslides, collapsing mountains, or glacier failures. Instead of spreading across open ocean immediately, the energy becomes trapped inside the fjord itself. The surrounding cliffs compress the force of the water, causing the wave to rise far higher and move far faster than most people can imagine. And that speed is what makes them so deadly. In a place like Tracy Arm, the distance between the collapse zone and nearby tour boats may only be a matter of seconds. There is no realistic evacuation window, no time for emergency broadcasts. In some cases, researchers believe the wave could strike before the sound of the landslide even reaches people on the water. That is what makes these events so terrifying. They are not slow-moving disasters people can prepare for hours in advance. They happen instantly. And once they begin, survival may depend entirely on where you are standing in that exact moment. What makes the danger inside Alaska's fjords even more disturbing is how many people enter these waters every single day. Juneau alone receives more than 1 million cruise ship passengers every summer. Its massive tourist vessels travel deep into the fjords, while smaller expedition tours move even closer to the glaciers, carrying visitors through narrow channels surrounded by unstable cliffs. For most tourists, the experience feels completely safe. People stand on observation decks drinking coffee while photographing floating icebergs. Families crowd onto Zodiac boats only a short distance from glacier walls that tower hundreds of feet above the water. Tour guides point toward waterfalls, wildlife, and calving ice while engines idle quietly beneath the mountains. But if a collapse like the 25 Tracy Arm event happened during peak tourist season, the reality could change in seconds. A landslide traveling hundreds of miles per hour would generate a wave almost instantly inside the confined fjord. Smaller boats near the impact zone would likely have no time to escape. No emergency turnaround, no safe distance. By the time passengers understood what they were looking at, the water could already be moving toward them. And despite the growing scientific concern surrounding unstable slopes across southeast Alaska, the tours continue every day. The cruise schedules remain full, the fjords remain open, and thousands of visitors continue traveling beneath mountains scientists already know are becoming increasingly unstable. What happened in Tracy Arm shocked many people around the world. But for scientists studying glacier collapse and unstable fjords, the event followed a pattern that has been building for decades. Alaska has seen this kind of disaster before. The difference now is how often these events are beginning to appear. In 1958, a massive earthquake triggered a rockslide inside Litchfield Bay, about 200 miles northwest of Tracy Arm. The impact generated the largest tsunami ever recorded in modern history. The wave reached an unimaginable height of more than 1,700 feet, tearing entire forests from the mountainsides and leaving permanent scars still visible today. Then it happened again. It's in 2015. A glacier destabilized slope collapsed into Tane Fjord, creating a wave more than 600 feet high. 2 years later in Greenland, another fjord collapse triggered a tsunami that destroyed parts of the village of Nugatsiaq. Several people were killed, and others were never found. Different locations, different years, but the same terrifying pattern. Retreating glaciers, unstable mountains, sudden collapse. Researchers say these events are no longer isolated geological accidents happening once every few centuries. As temperatures continue rising across Arctic regions, more glacier-supported slopes are beginning to weaken at the same time. And that means the conditions that created the Tracy Arm mega-tsunami may already exist in other fjords across the world right now. What makes the Tracy Arm disaster even more unsettling is that scientists had been warning about this exact scenario for years before the collapse happened. Research teams across Alaska had already identified dozens of unstable slopes along the fjord coastline, many of them directly above active tourism routes used by cruise ships and expedition boats every summer. Using advanced LIDAR scanning technology, researchers began tracking subtle movement across the mountainsides. Millimeter by millimeter, some slopes were already shifting. Tiny fractures widened through the rock. Sediment weakened. Entire sections of mountain slowly adjusted under the stress left behind by retreating glaciers. The danger was not invisible to science. The problem was timing. Scientists could see the mountains becoming unstable, but predicting the exact moment of collapse remained almost impossible. A slope might move gradually for decades before suddenly failing without warning. From the outside, The cliffs could appear completely unchanged, right up until the instant they broke apart. A 2023 study published in Nature Geoscience identified more than 40 high-risk, unstable slopes across Alaska's fjord systems. Some sit directly beside heavily traveled shipping corridors. Others overlook areas visited by thousands of tourists every week during peak season. And despite the growing evidence, no fully operational real-time warning system exists for fjord-generated mega-tsunamis in southeast Alaska. The mountains are being monitored. One of the most alarming realities exposed by the Tracy Arm event is how unprepared existing warning systems are for disasters like this. Most tsunami detection networks around the world were designed for earthquakes occurring deep beneath the ocean floor. Those systems work because traditional tsunamis often take hours to cross entire oceans before reaching populated coastlines. But inside a narrow fjord, a mega-tsunami does not give people hours. It may not even give them minutes. When a mountainside collapses directly into the water, the wave forms almost instantly at the source of impact. In a confined channel like Tracy Arm, the energy travels with terrifying speed through the fjord, leaving almost no time for evacuation or emergency response. Researchers have repeatedly warned that southeast Alaska currently lacks a dedicated real-time warning system, specifically designed for fjord-generated mega-tsunamis. Existing monitoring systems can track earthquakes, but they are far less effective at detecting sudden landslides occurring above the waterline. Other countries facing similar risks have struggled with the same problem. In Norway, engineers spent tens of millions of dollars attempting to stabilize unstable fjord slopes with steel anchors and monitoring systems. Even their authorities still cannot guarantee enough warning time for some vulnerable communities. And in Alaska, many of the dangerous slopes are far larger. The terrifying truth is that even with modern technology, some collapses may happen too fast for any warning system to save the people already inside the fjord. What is happening in Alaska is no longer being viewed as an isolated regional problem. Scientists are now seeing the same dangerous pattern emerging across glacier-covered mountain systems all over the planet. As global temperatures continue rising, enormous bodies of ice that once stabilized entire landscapes are retreating faster than many researchers expected. And when the ice disappears, the mountains change with it. In Greenland, several fjord communities already face ongoing risks from unstable slopes exposed by glacial retreat. In Patagonia, researchers have identified more than 20 potential collapse zones, capable of generating destructive waves inside narrow waterways. Norway has spent years investing massive amounts of money into monitoring unstable fjord walls. Yet even there, experts admit evacuation times may still be dangerously short if a major collapse occurs. But perhaps the most unsettling example is Antarctica. In some regions, ice loss is now exposing rock formations that have remained buried beneath glaciers for tens of millions of years. Entire mountain systems are being uncovered for the first time in human history, and scientists still do not fully understand how these newly exposed slopes will behave once the ice holding them in place disappears. This is the larger reality the Tracy Arm disaster revealed. Humanity is rapidly icing some of the most unstable mountain environments on Earth, while the systems designed to monitor and protect people are struggling to keep pace. What happened inside one Alaskan fjord may ultimately become part of a much bigger global pattern, still unfolding across the planet right now. As terrifying as the massive wave inside Tracy Arm was, scientists say another hidden danger may be even more concerning. When the mountainside collapsed into the fjord, the force did not only generate a surface mega-tsunami, it also disturbed the underwater slopes deep beneath the fjord itself. That movement triggered what researchers call a submarine landslide, a collapse occurring below the waterline along the submerged walls of the fjord. Unlike the towering impact waves seen above the surface, submarine landslides can create broader tsunami pulses, capable of traveling much farther beyond the narrow fjord entrance. And history has shown how dangerous those underwater collapses can become. In 1929, a massive submarine landslide off the coast of Newfoundland triggered a tsunami that killed dozens of people and severed transatlantic communication cables across hundreds of miles of ocean floor. At the time, almost nobody understood what had caused it until long after the disaster had already unfolded. Researchers say the underwater instability detected after the Tracy Arm collapse was relatively limited and weakened before reaching open ocean waters. But the next event may not remain contained inside the fjord. Several larger unstable slopes are still being monitored within the region, and if one of those collapses were to trigger a much larger submarine failure, the effects could extend far beyond the narrow glacier valleys of southeast Alaska. Right now, somewhere along the fjords of southeast Alaska, another mountainside may already be shifting, millimeter by millimeter, crack by crack, hidden behind glaciers, clouds, and steep granite walls most tourists will never look at twice. Cruise ships are still booking summer routes. Expedition tours are still carrying passengers deep into narrow glacier valleys. And every day, People continue traveling beneath slopes scientists know are becoming increasingly unstable. That is what makes the Tracy Arm event feel less like an isolated disaster, and more like a warning. Not a warning about one wave, but a warning about an environment changing faster than humans can fully predict or control. Researchers monitoring the region believe additional high-risk slopes still remain above several Alaska fjords, some potentially larger than the one that collapsed in 2025. The science is clear. The instability is growing. It's the only uncertainty left, is when the next major collapse will happen, and whether anyone will be caught inside the fjord when it does. Subscribe for breaking weather disasters, climate crisis updates, mega-tsunami coverage, extreme events, and real-time natural catastrophe analysis worldwide.